Welcome, everyone, to Put Your Cards on the Table, the only podcast where we're going to rule zero Colossal Dreadmaw as our commander. I'm back again with my co-host Isaac.
Hello.
It's good to have you, as
Excellent.
always now,
As always,
permanently.
home sweet home.
And today, we decided that we were kind of sick of just dunking on Wizards of the Coast every single podcast for two in a
Yeah.
row. So we decided to be a bit more positive, and today we're talking about mechanics, our favorites, our least favorites, and some of the most obscure bullshit we could possibly find.
Absolutely.
But we'll go ahead and kick it off. Isaac, would you like to introduce us to our
Oh
first
yeah.
favorite mechanic? We don't know each other's. Just to preface this, we don't know
Yeah.
what each other put down, so...
Yeah, we've both compiled a couple of lists of our favorite mechanics,
Mhm.
our least favorite mechanics that we've seen over the years, and maybe one or two kind of underrated mechanics that we think have kind of flown under the radar that we think would be nice to see come back in some
Mhm.
way, shape, or form.
Mhm.
All right. So, after seeing what I have defined as my three favorite mechanics, it has become very evident to me that I'm a big fan of card advantage.
Oh boy.
So number one, these are in no particular order, by the way, but first we have cycling.
Okay. Yeah. Completely
Cycling,
fair.
one of the coolest mechanics of all time. I love that flexibility of just being able to pay X, Y, or Z mana to pitch a card that you don't need, draw a new card. It's so excellent for the kinds of decks that have like kind of a toolbox thing going on where you've got all these different silver bullets to answer all these different situations. But oftentimes you're not going to need every single one of those bullets for every situation, so you can trade them in for new cards. That's kind of the baseline design philosophy of cycling, but the stuff that really excites me is like when you have decks built around cycling.
A big part of that was in Ikoria, they had a whole bunch of cycling payoffs, like the
Absolutely.
fox that gets
Hmm.
+1/+1 counters every time you cycle, the one that
Yes.
pings, the archer that pings people. That's very fun.
Yeah, and it's so much fun to play. Like one of my favorite cards ever printed, a little card from Amonkhet called, I believe, Shadows of the Grave.
Mm.
Yeah, so Shadows of the Grave. It's an instant. It is 1 and a black mana. Return to your hand all cards in your graveyard that you cycled or discarded this turn. It's fun. It has a kind of similar feeling to me as like Storm a lot of times if you're playing a cycling deck and you get stuff like Fluctuator, or what is it, New Perspectives, I believe is
Mhm.
the name of the card. These are both cards that reduce the cost of cycling, and you're just spinning through your wheels. It's so much fun. I love the cycling mechanic. And then you also start to see really cool cards. I know we've had cards throughout over the years where we've had a few where it's like the cycling cost is like really expensive, but it does something additional when you cycle the card. Or you'll have cards like, oh, like you untap a permanent whenever you cycle it and stuff like that. It just feels good. Cycling is my first one.
Yeah, it's like I would describe it almost as if you're like spinning a revolver, right? Like you're
Mm-hmm.
trying to get that bullet into the chamber. Yeah, very very cool feeling. Absolutely
Love
agree.
cycling.
I never like focused on cycling much, but it is a very very cool mechanic. I remember some of the first lands I have are like Lonely Sandbar and stuff.
Oh
The
yeah,
cycling lands, those are always
yeah.
nice to have too. Yeah, absolutely, very fun. Well, I will kind of match you with a relatively basic mechanic that I just adore very much, and that's landfall.
Landfall.
I love value engines, and landfall is like the definitive value ability. Like,
It's as value comes.
yeah, it's like I need to play lands, so why not get a bonus for playing my lands? Like, it just gives you more. My favorite commander of all time is Tatiova Benthic Druid, which is
Mm.
literally just a 3/3 body
Oh yeah,
with landfall, gain a life, draw a card. It's so fun. It is absolutely so fun.
that is one spicy merfolk. I remember
It really
I
is.
played a Tatiova deck for about a year or so after she was originally came out in that was the Dominaria set, right?
Yeah.
And oh man, that was a fun deck to play. The reason I actually stopped playing it was because the particular way that I played it was particularly cruel.
Just kind of mean, yeah.
The primary win condition of that deck when I played it was a little card called Sunder. So I would just play as many exploration effects as I could fit
hmm
into my deck for a reasonable monetary value
Yeah, yeah.
because oftentimes those effects can get pretty expensive. But I would just play as many lands as possible to draw as many cards as possible to play as many lands as possible. Get a little incidental life gain in there, which is nice. And then I'd play Sunder, which is just 6 mana. It's 4 blue. Return all lands to their owner's hands.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So those would all get bounced. Everybody else would get bounced. I would do this before I played any lands on my turn, and then with like 3 explore, I'd like play 4 more lands out, and just kind of stare down everybody with like counter magic up. It's not a good way to make friends, and you don't have to play Tatio that way, but that's the way I did it. It was fun. Ooh, boy, it was mean though.
Yeah, yeah. I just not only does landfall double as like a value engine, it can also just be like a massive finisher too, with stuff like
Absolutely.
Scape Shift, where it just triggers like 80 of your landfalls
Oh
at a
yeah.
time. Stuff like
Oh
Scoot
yeah.
Swarm as well being out
One of
during that.
one of my
So
favorite
good.
finishers in the history of constructed Magic at all. I mean, this is its own modern deck and has been for a long time, but I love to play it in Commander as well. Is simply Escape Shift in a deck that has Valakut and the Molten Pinnacle
Mm-hmm.
in it.
Mm-hmm.
Classic banger of a
Blast
win
people with some
condition.
mountains.
That's right. I mean, if you could do it in probably one or two colors. I mean, you could do it in two colors, probably like red, green, without too much difficulty, without
Mm-hmm.
any kind of extra pieces there. Just put Valakut and a bunch of mountains in play. For anybody listening that is not aware, Scape Shift is a 4 mana sorcery. It's in green. It lets you sacrifice any number of lands, and then you search your library for that many lands and put them onto the battlefield tapped. They don't have to be basics. So one of the lands that you can get was a Valakut and the Molten Pinnacle, a land from the original Zendikar block that says if you have 3 or more mountains in play, when a mountain enters the battlefield, it deals 3 damage to any target. So what you can do is say you've got like 10 lands in play, you Scape Shift, you get Valakut and 9 mountains, and just machine gun people down. Another great way to take advantage of it is a lot of times people will play stuff that makes all of your lands count as X, Y, or Z basic land
Yeah.
type, either just mountains or all basic land types. So that way it doesn't even matter what lands you go and fetch out. But oh man, that's such a fun
That is a
fun way to
good
take
mechanic.
advantage of that mechanic. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh boy.
Alrighty, so we'll move on here to my second pick for favorite mechanics. So we talked about cycling before. We're back. We're here to pay 2 colorless mana to acquire some card advantage, and we're here to investigate.
Ooh,
Investigate is
interesting.
my next pick. I absolutely love this mechanic. Not only in the sets where it has appeared, did I love the like narrative aspect of it, especially in like Shadows over Innistrad when
Yeah.
we didn't even know the full story of the set yet, and like Jason, all these other characters were investigating, looking for clues and stuff like that, and it reflected that super well.
At the end of the mystery, you just discover that Nahiri's a fucker, and that's the whole
Yeah,
mystery.
indeed, and yeah, Nahiri more fucker than ever. And simply not only that, but it counts as an artifact,
Mm-hmm.
right? Your clue tokens. So investigate. Anytime you investigate, to investigate one time is to make a clue token, which has the activated ability of paying 2 generic mana to sacrifice it and draw a card. So, I mean, if you're looking at it from like a sacrifice perspective, from an artifact perspective, clue tokens can be engines all unto themselves, depending on the deck that you play them in. Um, Great examples, things like Ashnod the Uncaring or Corvold Fakehurst King. You can pop off just by blasting out a few clue tokens. But I just love how they function to smooth out gameplay. And honestly, it kind of serves the same purpose as cycling. A lot of times you're going to see cards that have the investigate effect attached to them that are essentially just, they have the same effect as another card, but they're a little more expensive and they also investigate. You'll see those, and you'll see cards that are engines, like what's the name of the creature, the green creature that investigates whenever you get a land? There's a little landfall shout out.
Tireless Tracker? Is
Tireless
that what it
Tracker.
is?
Yeah, so this one isn't really an example of like, oh, it's a well-known effect that also investigates. This is like a clue engine. And
Mm-hmm.
you're gonna see a few of these around. They are excellent things, not only to play and build around, but even just incidentally appearing in decks. They do a great job of smoothing out what you're seeing in your hand and your card advantage. And also, if you like to play draw go magic, it can be a really effective way, just having a stockpile of clues to, if you pass your turn with all your mana open, the kind of classic conundrum that you see there is, if you're holding up counter magic, if you're holding up responses and answers and removal and stuff, if nobody plays anything that begs a counter spell or removal or what have you, and the turn gets back to you and you didn't spend any of your mana, you just put yourself quite a bit behind. This is kind of the classic conundrum. So you need something to spend that mana on, whether that be, historically speaking, a Sphinx's Revelation or a Blue Sunseed. In my case, clues. We love investigating.
When clues were first a thing, because I drafted a set of original Shadows over Innistrad, I
Right.
remember. But when clues were first a thing, I didn't care for them much. I thought they were a
Mhm.
little bit boring, but as I've learned more about the game and learned like what types of decks I love to play, I love artifacts, and clues have become like a best friend in my decks.
Absolutely.
They are so fun.
Absolutely. Interestingly enough, I actually had a very similar reception to clues when I first saw them back in the day when Shadows over Innistrad first released.
Hmm.
I didn't specifically dislike it, but I was very unimpressed by it and just didn't bother with it very much. But over the years, not only have we seen more cards with the investigate mechanic be printed, and some of them much more powerful in some cases than the stuff that we initially saw in Shadows over Innistrad. Uh, but honestly, just like kind of, I really do feel like I took it for granted, and the more that I have played with those effects, the more that I have come to really value, even if it's not efficient, it's consistent is the thing
Yeah,
of always
absolutely.
having that option as long as you have a clue in play, being able to pay 2 mana to get a card, which isn't the worst rate in the world, by the
That's
way.
about average, yeah.
Yeah.
Moving on to my next. This is a mechanic that I absolutely adore and I love, and I pretty much know for a fact that it is never coming back. So this is why I'm not putting it in the obscure mechanics,
Okay.
because I'm not really hoping for it to come back, but I love it. And that is Fate Seal.
Oh, Fate Seal.
Yeah. For those unfamiliar, oh, what were you gonna say?
There's one card with Fate Seal, I
There are
believe.
two.
Oh, there's two.
Yes. So
Okay.
for those unfamiliar, you probably have not heard it unless you've been playing Magic for a while. To Fate Seal is to Fate Seal X. Look at the top X cards of an opponent's library, put any number of them on the bottom of their library, and the rest on top in any order. It is essentially picking an opponent and scrying for them. And they don't get to see those cards.
I've often jokingly heard this effect referred to as evil scrying.
Yes, that's exactly what it is. It was only ever printed on two cards, and that is Mesmeric Sliver, which causes all slivers to enter,
Oh.
and Fate Seal 1. Yeah, and a card called Spin into Myth, which bounces something back to hand and Fate
Yeah.
Seals.
Spin into Myth was the only one that I remembered. Man,
Yeah,
Mesmeric Sliver,
Mesmeric
deep
Sliver.
cut.
I run it in my Sliver deck because I love slivers.
Excellent.
It is super super unfun to be on the receiving end of, because you're essentially just like, well, you pick a player and they only draw basic lands the rest of the game, right? Like that
Yeah.
shit sucks, but it's
Now,
so fun to do to
and
people.
there is also, I will say that, so this mechanic originally appeared in like the
Time
Time
Spiral,
Spiral
yes.
block, right? Yeah. So for anybody who's not aware, uh, way back when, in kind of the I would say like the front half of Magic's
Yeah,
lifespan, it
for
definitely
sure.
was, when they were starting to get a little more experimental with stuff. There was the Time Spiral and the Planar Chaos blocks that played with, Time Spiral in particular played with new mechanics. They were testing out new mechanics. This is where Tarmogoyf came from.
Hmm.
Lots of other stuff. There's a card that where you enchant an instant in your graveyard. There's all kinds of really weird stuff where there were all kind of experimental mechanics that they thought that they might do in future sets. And so there were some cards that literally had one or two cards in this entire block that would have this mechanic,
Hmm.
because it really was kind of a playground for those effects. Not dissimilar from like the list that we have in like the modern era of Magic, except this was an actual block of cards that you could actually play. And then in Planar Chaos, instead of testing out new stuff, it was mostly about breaking color identity and giving effects that already existed to other colors. And yeah, and this one was from Time Spiral, not Planar Chaos, right? The Fate Seal effect.
I believe it was Future Sight
Future Sight,
it was
right?
originally printed
Yeah.
in. But yeah, it's part of the Time Spiral block. Yes.
Right. And I will say there is almost one more Fate Seal card. Almost.
What's that?
I suppose we would say that this is a bit of an honorary
Fate Seal.
An honorary Fate Seal card. It's one of those things where, like, I mean, for example, Tatiova technically is not a landfall card.
That's true. She doesn't say landfall in her original printing. Yes.
Yeah, although that's
she
a
does
whole
now.
other. Oh, does she really? Did they make that evergreen?
No, I don't believe so. I believe that they reprinted her. I think she's on the list. Let me double check.
I see. Because I know landfall as an evergreen mechanic is kind of its own can of worms that people have been asking for a long, long time. But we will say this honorary Fate Seal card is in fact Jace the Mind Sculptor.
Oh, yeah, that is true. That is true.
Yeah. He has a +2 to effectively Fate Seal 1.
Tatiova Benthic Druid was printed with landfall actually on her card on the Dominaria remastered, like old framed version of her.
Gotcha.
And of course says that on Magic Arena now as well. Right. But yes, you are correct. So yep, that's Fate Seal. I absolutely adore it, but I'm gonna be honest, I really don't hope it comes back because it's not very fun to be on the receiving end of. I just like it.
I honestly hope it does come back.
Like just on a couple of cards.
I would love a card that is a Fate Seal engine.
Oh my gosh.
I would build a deck around that in less than a second. One of my favorite decks of all time, this is a modern constructed deck, was Lantern Control. Oh man. Lantern of Insight was the kind of the card that you build the deck around. It just has every person play with the top card of their library revealed. And you can sacrifice it to make somebody shuffle their library. The whole deck would essentially, it was very non-traditional control in that you're not playing counter spells and removal and stuff. You play Lantern of Insight, and then you play like Dacra Mystic and all kinds of other stuff that just basically mill the top card of somebody's library. And your only goal is to get yourself to draw good cards and get your opponent to draw very useless cards.
Yeah, like 8 drops or basic lands.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
It was like Fate Seal Light. The objective was to Fate Seal. Yes. It didn't say Fate Seal. Yeah.
DIY Fate Seal. Yeah. Funnily enough, if I might bring up my next mechanic.
Absolutely.
Similarly, this is one that there is a 100% chance that this mechanic never comes back. I would say that it is more likely that Fate Seal comes back than this mechanic comes back. God. But man, I'll squeeze everything I can out of the cards that already have it, and that's Dredge.
Yeah, yep. I couldn't have possibly seen this one coming.
Oh, I love Dredge.
I gotta say, it's one of the most fun mechanics I've ever played with. Dredge is incredible.
When you play in the graveyard as often as I do, when you read a card that says mill X cards, you start to read that as draw X cards.
Yeah.
Is really what kind of starts to happen. I remember like one of the first like 5 commander decks I ever played was Carador Ghost Chieftain. This was one of the first commander decks that I had played ones before, but this is the first one where I doctored my own list.
Yeah.
Ordered the cards for it and built it myself. And I had just about every dredge effect under the sun, including Dark Blast in that deck.
Oh my god.
The card pool wasn't as big back in the day. So you play Dark Blast. Sometimes you got to give something -1/-1. But anyway, the moment where I really fell in love with Dredge is when a more experienced friend of mine, I was playing with him and playing my deck and stuff, and he was like, hey, there's a really cute trick you can do with the Dredge effect. And I was like, oh, what's that? And he told me, and this was really where the hooks got in. It really captured my heart. If you ever have a Golgari Grave Troll when you're opening a hand, I mean, it doesn't have to be a Golgari Grave Troll.
You just choose not to play a land turn 1.
You draw a card, and you go to 8, you discard the Dredge effect. I mean, obviously, it doesn't have to be a Golgari Grave Troll. It can be any Dredge effect. But that's the biggest dredge in the game, so we love to see that. To explain what dredge does, it is not the most intuitive mechanic in the world, but it is fun as hell. It says whenever you would draw a card, you may instead put the card in question with dredge from your graveyard into your hand and then mill X cards. So Golgari Grave Troll has dredge 6, so you would mill 6 cards from the top of your library and put the Grave Troll back in your hand. All you got to do, find a way to discard that puppy back into your graveyard, and you've got yourself an engine.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely delightful. From the original Ravnica block, they hit the nail on right on the head with that one. I was so disappointed to see Scavenge in
Yeah.
as the Golgari mechanic in the new. I mean, it's not the worst mechanic in the world, but it just kind of paled in comparison. It was a candle to the flame when it came to dredge. I love this mechanic. I can't dredge enough.
Dredge is a roaring fucking inferno compared to
Yeah,
Scavenge's
and I
tiny
will say
fucking Bic lighter flame.
there
Yeah.
was one card with dredge. It actually just now occurs to me, printed after the original Ravnica block, and that was in the first Modern Horizons set, I believe. It was the card Shenanigans, I believe, has dredge.
I'm
Which
not sure if I'm even familiar with it. Yeah.
Yeah, so let me get this here. Yeah, it's from the first Modern Horizons set. It is a red card. So
Oh.
typically this effect would only appear in black and green. It was a red common, is a sorcery in Modern Horizons 1. 1 and a red, destroy target artifact, and it has dredge 1.
Oh, that's very funny.
Yeah, so a
I
very
like
useful
that.
mechanic. If we ever saw Dredge again, it's not going above 2, I think. Dredge
No.
6 is pretty egregious.
You might be lucky enough to see it in more like Modern Horizon sets, but I definitely agree with you when you say it's not coming back. Like it's never being printed as like a
A set
primary
mechanic.
mechanic. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
never coming back in that regard.
As much as I love it, I will admit, Dredge is
It
overpowered.
really is, but it's so fun.
Oh, it's so fun. Oh, man. Life from the Loam?
Life from the Loam is one of my favorite Magic cards.
Yeah, well, Life from giving instant and sorceries Dredge is
Mm-hmm.
deceptively powerful because it kind of skips that step of having to find a way to get with creatures, having to get it into your graveyard because they automatically go there. That's one of the things that makes Life from the Loam so powerful. That's the 2-mana green sorcery. You can pick 3 lands from your graveyard and put them into your hand, and the card itself has dredge 3, so really is an engine by
It
itself.
is in itself a loop. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
really good.
very excellent card there.
Moving on to my next mechanic here. And I guess my third one. Do you have any others after this, or are we moving on to
That's all the
that?
list that I made for my
Okay, okay.
favorite
No, that's
mechanics.
perfectly fine. Then we will end this segment of our favorite mechanics with my final one, which is voting. Council's Dilemma
Voting.
and Will of the Council. I
Yeah.
love those mechanics. If anyone is unfamiliar, they were printed in a lot of in Take the Crown.
Yeah, this is a conspiracy
Yeah,
mechanic, right?
conspiracy. Thank you. Yeah, I just my mind blanked on that. And it was reprinted in the Streets of New Capenna commander deck.
Right.
They are slightly different abilities. The ability Will of the Council involves everyone voting, and then the majority of votes wins, and that effect happens. This is
Right.
something. This is something like
Council's Judgment.
yeah, Council's Judgment, thank you. Which is a 3-mana white spell that says everyone, starting with you, everyone votes for a permanent. The permanent with the most votes or tied for the most votes gets exiled.
Yeah.
So
This card,
whatever
that
has the
card is
most
insane,
votes.
by the way.
It's so good.
It skips Shroud and Hexproof.
Yep, because voting
Completely
doesn't
ignores them.
target.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's played in. I don't know if it still is, but I know for a long time it was played in Legacy control decks.
Yep. It's very
Sim-
good.
simply because I mean, in a format where you see things like a true name Nemesis all the time,
Yeah,
it
just
doesn't
get rid of
matter
that
if you've got
shit.
protection. Yeah, you can rip that thing anytime.
And then Council's Dilemma is slightly different because basically it gives you 2 or more options, and every vote for one of those options triggers an effect. So,
Yeah,
like, the card Tivet, Seller of Secrets has money or time, I believe.
yeah.
Uh,
Time and money are his
yeah,
voting
so
effects.
time gives you.
No, time and money is expropriate, I
Oh,
believe.
yeah. Oh, man, I gotta remember what all this is.
Expropriate, I think, is a great example. It's definitely the most notorious card to have any kind of voting effect on
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah, so Expropriate is a blue spell. It costs 9 total, sorcery. Council's Dilemma, starting with you, each player votes for time or money. For each time vote, take an extra turn after this one. For each money, choose a permanent owned by a voter and gain control of it, exile,
Yeah.
expropriate. So slightly different, but I just kind of grabbed voting as a mechanic overall
Right.
because not only is it very strong, some of the cards are very strong in like 1v1 formats, like you
Mhm.
mentioned, Will of the Council, insanely good card for 1v1s. But in multiplayer formats, it adds a whole nother layer of gameplay.
So much fun
I
in multiplayer.
love that. Yeah,
Tons
it's
of
so fun
politics
just to
involved.
talk with people over the
Yeah.
table. Like, well, if you vote for this, then I'll give you this later. But it's obviously putting you ahead no matter what they
Right.
do.
And
Oh,
then
it's so
you
good.
do see with some cards they'll have things like, oh, when voting you get to vote an additional time. Or I
Yeah.
know there's a zombie from the original conspiracy set that says whenever voting is finished, if anybody voted for something different than you, they lose 2 life. Is that the most crazy effect in the world? No. Is it
But it's
on
funny.
theme? Absolutely. Hilarious as hell. Love this card.
Or like a illusion of choice as well, where you get to
Oh
control
man.
people while they vote this turn. That's
Excellent.
so
Yeah.
funny.
What I love about that one is that it's reality.
Yeah, is that it's not a magic card. It's
That
real
one is an
life.
ow. We're not a politics podcast, but to bring up Tivit, Seller of Secrets, he's a great example of that because he does have an ability while voting, you get to vote an additional time, and
Yeah,
his dilemma is evidence and bribery.
that's right. Treasures
Yeah,
are clues. Wow,
yes. Whenever
clues
he
throwback.
they keep coming back up, I tell you. Yeah, whenever he enters the battlefield or deals combat damage to a player, everyone votes for evidence or bribery. For each evidence vote, you investigate, and for each bribery vote, you make a treasure token. This card really excited me at first, and it still kind of does. I think they missed a little bit with the with voting as a mechanic on this card, simply because I mean it does have the secondary part while voting, you vote an additional time, but it feels a little bit like a cop out with that first effect. It's just very generic value. It doesn't feel like the voting really matters there. If
Yeah,
that makes any kind of sense, like it's really just a question of I mean, do you want cards or mana? These are the two most useful things to you in any particular game
yeah,
of Commander.
completely fair.
Yeah, it's not super. It doesn't feel like there's a lot of weight to those votes, but still, hopefully we get to see some more cards in the future. I would love to see more of this mechanic.
Yeah, I think that it'll come back, especially in like Commander
Oh,
precons and stuff,
absolutely.
because it's very
This
popular in
this
multiplayer.
mechanic plays so well in Commander.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But moving on from the stuff that we love, how about some of our least favorite mechanics, Isaac? Would you care to kick us off again?
I absolutely would. I absolutely would. So, call me a negative Nancy. This one I had a really big list and I had to really shave it down. Um, it took me like 15 minutes to find my 3 favorite mechanics, and it didn't feel like I had that much competition for it. For my least favorite mechanics, oh man, I really had to dig deep to find out which ones I think hurt me the most.
hmm
Number one, and I will say this is my number one least favorite mechanic of
Of
all
all
time.
time. Okay.
So with my favorites, they were not in any particular order. These aren't either, but I will say that this first one is my singular least favorite mechanic. Um, Adapt. I
Really?
hate adapt. Yeah, so for anybody that is not aware, adapt is a mechanic from Guilds of Ravnica.
hmm
It kind of plays off of a similar mechanic from the past called Monstrosity. With Monstrosity, it was an activated ability that you can only activate it once. It had a binary effect on it, where once you've activated it, that creature becomes monstrous. It would put a number of +1/+1 counters on it, and typically it would trigger another effect.
Yeah.
With adapt, it's like that, except it's. I mean, it is essentially the same. It says you can only activate this ability once, and then this creature has adapted. However, it also, if I remember correctly, give me 1 second here. If I remember correctly, you can't even adapt something if it gets counters on it from somewhere else, I
Correct.
believe.
Correct. Adapted is if it has counters on it, period, usually. If it has counters on it, it cannot use the adaptability.
Yeah, and that just feels like such a huge miss to me. just from like if you're looking at this from a perspective of, because adapt is it's essentially like it's a turn on effect, it's an engine effect for +1/+1 counter decks, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what do +1/+1 counter decks love to do?
Put plus ones on everything.
Put them on
Like
everything.
as
And
they enter during your turn every time. Yeah.
exactly. So the second you put one of these counters on a creature with adapt, like if we look at this from a game design perspective, right? Each word of ability text on a card takes up a certain amount of what I would call like a balance space,
Yeah,
right?
it's like a currency almost. You
Right.
have to keep
Yeah,
track of how
we'll
strong a
call it
card
in
is.
points, right?
Yeah.
We'll say it in points. Let's say trample is 1 point, adapt 2 or whatever, depending on how
Mm-hmm.
much it costs, can be 2 points as well. The second that you put a counter on that card from another source, you're paying the mana cost for however many points that card originally would have been worth, but you have now reduced the value of this card, right? By buffing
Yeah.
it from an outside source. I really don't like how that interacts with other stuff, especially when it comes to it being a Simic mechanic from Ravnica, because I mean, one of the most fun things you can do in my eyes with the Ravnica block is like a Ravnica block cube where you play Ravnica
Yes.
cards from all three sets, super thematic. The archetypes in that cube build themselves essentially, but Simic, I mean, fortunately, Graft and Evolve are powerful enough that it'll probably be okay with Adapt as well.
Mm-hmm.
But you really get the short end of the stick there because, like, if you play a Graft card and then graft a +1/+1 counter onto something with Adapt, you're canceling out that ability essentially,
Yeah, it just
and
stops
that really
existing.
frustrates me. Not only that, but also I think most of the Adapt activated abilities are some of the most egregiously costed effects I've ever seen.
Yeah, that's fair. I would
It's like
say,
5 mana for 2 +1/+1 counters. Like
yeah.
not worth it.
Yeah, I will say, a lot of the adapt like payoffs, like the abilities that the creatures gain. For example, Growth Chamber Druid, is that what it is? The one that taps?
Growth Chamber Druid is a pretty solid one.
I was gonna say that's probably the best, where it's like the adapt is a really ridiculous like high mana cost, but if it has
It's
plus one
5
plus one,
mana and it gets 3 counters on it. Yeah.
but if it has a +1/+1 counter on it, it taps for 3 mana instead of 1, which is really
Yeah.
good. So you can play it on turn 2 because it's 2 mana. You put a +1/+1 counter on it the next turn, and boom, now it taps for 3 mana. But I will agree that that sucks now because now you can't give it +3/+3 with adapt later, which is it's not flavorful either because the
Yeah.
Simic are all about growing and evolving. Like adapt is literally changing to suit your environment, and
Right.
now I'm a 1 fucking 3 instead of a 0 2 or whatever it is. I'm
Right.
probably good. Like we're good. We're done now. I was like, that's
Yeah.
so lame. That sucks. No, I
Agreed.
agree. I absolutely agree.
This mechanic made me so angry.
Similarly, kind of the same thing where it's like I don't I mechanic wise like the ability is okay, but I just hate it because of what it is. I hate learn from Strixhaven.
Learn.
I fucking hate learn. Anyone unfamiliar? To learn, you may reveal a lesson card from outside the game, usually your sideboard if it's in competitive play, and put it into your hand, or discard a card to draw a card. And these are specifically on lesson cards, which are spells that you can put into your deck or into your sideboard, like I mentioned, to pull from cards that have the ability to learn on them. And that is so fucking lame.
Yeah.
I am sorry. I hate the learn cards. I hate lessons. I think that all of them suck except like mascot exhibition. Like some of them are good cards, but like I just don't like them in general. And to learn to just like wish a card into your hand or you loot is so boring to me. I think this is such a lame mechanic. I think it completely thematically misses. Like, yeah, sure, you're putting fucking a social science card into your hand from your sideboard, but like, okay, but is that really learning? You just grab a card. I know that the cards
Yeah.
are knowledge, but oh, it's
You
so
know,
clunky. I don't
yeah,
like it.
it's interesting that you say this. I've never really spent much time thinking about this mechanic, but I can certifiably say from the very day it was previewed, my eyes glazed over and I was completely uninterested in it.
Yeah.
I've never really thought about it long enough to get into the nitty gritty of like what makes this mechanic something that is just wholly uninteresting to me. But I think you're right. I think it's just flavorfully, it doesn't really do it for me. Mechanically, feels like a little bit of a cop out.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, I get why they added the looting effect onto it, or
Yeah,
rummaging
yeah.
rather.
Sometimes
Uh,
you don't.
well,
Sometimes
right,
you
because
don't need those.
well, right. Not only that, but also it would just be too parasitic of a mechanic without
Yeah.
it. You would have such a small card pool to be able to interact with that would never change unless, God forbid, the learn mechanic come back.
Uh,
But then also, like, and for example, in Commander, you don't have a sideboard, so
yeah.
you can't pull a card from outside the game. In Commander, you only get to rummage. But then, like, it's also a matter of like it kind of comes back to that kind of points thing we were talking about, where a lot of these cards both that have the learn mechanic and are the lesson cards,
Mm-hmm.
like a certain amount of that balance design space is spent on like we
Well, you
have to
can
make
pull this card from outside the game, like
right.
as you need
It's
it. So
the
yeah.
idea is versatility at the cost of power, but where they missed there is the flavor part that needs to go in the middle that kind of bonds those
Mm-hmm.
things. Yeah, it's kind of it's very dry. It's a very like graham cracker kind of saltine
Yeah.
mechanic, I think.
It's supposed to be like pulling silver bullets, like a wish mechanic, but you only have these select cards, and sometimes
And
they
none of them are
can be
very interesting.
useful. But
Yeah.
yeah, they're not interesting. They're not super strong. It takes up room in your sideboard, so it feels clunky if you're doing more than best of one matches. And
Right.
just I don't think conveys the idea of learning very well. I just don't like it overall. I really hate learn.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point there of like how does it interact with like anything more like if you're doing like three ofs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um you kind of what you essentially have to do at the deck building stage now with the learn mechanic, if you're considering playing any of these lesson cards, is you have to look at your sideboard and you have to go, all right, there's an opportunity cost here. If I play X, Y, or Z lesson effect, then I can potentially get that effect out of my sideboard in the first match, before I've done my sideboarding, if I need it, right? But now that also means I have to put X number of learn cards in my deck, so that's an additional opportunity cost. Where in really competitive formats like modern, for example, like like learn could never squeeze its way into modern, I don't think, just because each card slot is so
Yeah,
valuable. So the opportunity cost of trying to put even a few lesson and learn cards both
it
into your
wouldn't be
main deck
worth it.
and your sideboard, it wouldn't be worth it. Even if you were able to get the exact silver bullet that you need in that first match from your sideboard because you're playing learn effects, more than likely the opportunity cost of simply not having that in the first match and then being able to sideboard in a much more efficient version of
For the
that in the
next
second
two.
and third match,
Yeah.
that's probably going to benefit you more than having the opportunity to be able to snag that from your sideboard in the first match, right?
Yep, I wholeheartedly agree. I just dislike the mechanic. I really hope that they either I hope that it doesn't come back if we return to Strixhaven. I hope that a variation comes back where they change it around a little. I'm not a game
Right.
designer. I am a game designer, but I don't know how to fix this problem. I can't say that I have I'm getting a degree in game design actually, so that's what. I'll give it some thought, but yeah, I think it should change. That's the
Absolutely.
moral
Yeah,
of
I'm
that
with you there.
story.
All right. Well, moving on to my next least favorite mechanic. Again, these next two that I have are don't really have any particular order to them. I hate adapt. But this next one is tribute from
Oh, yeah.
Theros. I actually have a very close relationship with this effect, and that's one of the reasons why I've come to resent it so much.
Mm,
Um, I started playing in the Magic 2014 Return to Ravnica block. So Theros was one of the first times I was around for a new set coming out. I this is when they were still doing like not commanders, but just pre-constructed like 60 card decks that had themes. Typically they would be like two color decks. One of those in the Theros times was a red green tribute deck. I bought that. I thought it was really cool. It was full of like monsters from Greek mythology. I thought that was the coolest. All these big serpents
Hmm.
and like dragons and all this stuff. It was super cool. And thematically, I will say, this mechanic has a lot going for it, flavor wise. But so essentially, the way that tribute works is, I believe it's always on an enter the battlefield trigger.
Hmm.
So when a creature that has tribute enters the battlefield, you choose an opponent. That opponent either pays tribute or does not. If they pay tribute, then the creature gets a number of +1/+1 counters on it equal to its tribute value. So if it has tribute 4, it gets 4 +1/+1 counters. If they do not pay tribute, then it has a secondary effect. There's ones that'll like make it so that creatures can't block. There's ones where you'll gain life. Various stuff.
I think there's a giant that deals like 3 damage to each opponent or something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's like the best tribute
Yeah.
card. Yeah. And I think there's oh wait, no, I was gonna say Ember Swallower. That's actually a monstrosity card. Um, but no, so the issue with tribute is there is a right answer. That right answer changes. So when you choose
Hmm.
your opponent, in any given circumstance, it feels like it's something where it's like a dilemma, right? And they're like, oh man, what do I choose? Which it kind of is, but none of the cards are powerful enough for it to provide a real dilemma. And if you point it at an opponent, there's always a right answer.
Hmm.
If they're holding a removal spell, then it's a right answer to give that thing as many +1/+1 counters as you could ever desire because they can simply Doomblade it. you know,
Hmm.
or if it has an effect where maybe it puts a -1/-1 counter on a creature that opponent controls if they don't pay the tribute. What if they don't have any creatures in play? That sucks. um,
Or
and
like
I started
like with the life gain thing, like, I'm at 2 health, I'm gonna play this tribute card, and in response, your opponent plays a shock.
right.
What the fuck is the point? Yeah,
Yeah,
there's
and
no choice
I
there.
I became intimately familiar with that exact frustration so quickly when I started playing this deck. Um, and I bought packs and stuff and added my own cards to it, and it felt good to be able to do that because one of the most exciting things as a new player is when you have sets like that with really core mechanics because it makes it really easy when you're opening packs and stuff to just clock those cards that have that
Yeah.
mechanic and go, this goes in my deck. Now I have more tribute cards in my deck. Now I have more elemental heroes in my
Yeah,
deck.
yeah, it's true.
Um, it's very easy to. That's one of the big benefits of that's one of the big appeals of like tribal
Yeah,
decks, which is probably my favorite deck archetype ever
tribal
in
is
every format.
delicious.
I love tribal, but yeah, tribute. It's such a huge miss. I would get so frustrated so frequently because it would make me feel like when I'm looking at the card, it's like, I'm an evil mastermind, and then I would present it to my opponent, and every time they're the evil mastermind.
Mhm.
And I did not like how that felt. I got so frustrated with it. So yeah,
I think that's such a cool idea for a mechanic too, like offering up to these incredibly powerful
right.
monsters or beings, like you have to make a choice and both are bad for you, but yeah, in the end it's just kind of a miss because it doesn't have to be bad for them. It's up to them in the
Yeah,
end, which is
yeah.
really
It
bad.
just wasn't. It's just that every one of these cards has two effects. Your opponent gets to pick which effect that they get, and neither of them are impactful enough for it to matter. I think a better
Mhm.
way to if I were to design this, some ideas that come to mind is like maybe instead of it being like here's the secondary effect which is different from card to card, and then here's +1/+1 counters, maybe it's just the same thing, like it's the same
Just
two
two
things for
different
all of them.
effects.
Well, right, and maybe something like losing life or discarding cards, right?
Oh,
Something like
wow,
that.
yeah.
Like that's a lot more compelling.
I agree.
I think. Yeah, tribute. Like this one makes me sad because like flavorfully, it's there. That's really cool, but it just is such a huge miss when it comes to real gameplay.
Yeah. I wonder if it could return at some point, honestly, a little bit changed, a little bit reworked, right?
I would like to see that if they changed it up a bit.
Yeah, I
And it
agree.
could even be as simple as just upping the general power level of cards that have tribute.
Yeah, absolutely.
That could be another way to kind of repair that. Because Theros and Khans of Tarkir, those sets, they were adjacent to each other, and they were honestly the kind of valley of like power creep
Mhm.
in the last 10 years. Like these were the sets that kind of had like the least power attached to them. Like if you look at like a curve of like Return to Ravnica block, Theros block, Khans of Tarkir block, that's a decline in power
Hmm.
over those 3 blocks, and then that's where we start after cons to creep upward, kind of peaking for a while at Throne of Eldraine, then plateauing, and now we're in the modern day where the graph is gone.
Yeah.
Nothing matters anymore. But yeah, I think that kind of suffered from that design space a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving on to my second, again, not in any particular order, but now my second of my least favorite picks.
But
I don't like the party mechanic.
oh man, that actually floors me because I should have put that on mine.
I feel like party is such a fucking miss. First of all,
Agreed.
it's not in the D&D set. Like, why?
Yeah.
Huh? But also the payoff for party, right? Party is the idea that you play you play a card, and if you control certain types of creatures, you get a bonus effect. Like if you
Yeah.
control a warrior, if you control a mage, or if you control a wizard,
The
whatever. Yeah,
Yeah,
like
you got
warrior,
warriors,
wizard,
wizards,
rogue.
and clerics.
Yeah, rogues and clerics, yeah. And if you control those, you get some type of bonus effect. But on like 90% of the playable party cards, that effect is just reducing the mana cost of the card.
Yep.
Which I get it is like the teamwork effect, right? Like you're lowering the cost, but it's so boring.
Yep. Not very thoughtful.
Yeah, I feel like there is so much more they could have done with a party mechanic, like
Yeah.
payoff for running different tribes. I think that would have been so much cooler than just you can destroy a creature for 2 mana instead of 5.
Right.
Wow, isn't that nice? It's like,
And
yeah, but eh.
I will say it. So it was not in the Dungeons and Dragons main sets, but
Mhm.
one of the, I believe, the Battle for Baldur's Gate
Yes.
commander precons was built
Yeah,
around the party
revolved around
mechanic.
it.
And I really would have liked to see it in the main set because while those decks, the precons do have a certain amount of design space set aside for them to have new cards that are built around those decks. That deck, and if you're going to upgrade it, it suffers from the fact that the Zendikar version of the party effects are so wholly lame
Yeah.
that there isn't very much upgrade space for your cool new commander. I actually really like both of the playable commanders with the party mechanic from that deck. One of them like buffs, I believe it's like every end step, all of your party creatures get plus one
Yeah,
plus one
buffs all
counters.
the tribes. Yeah.
The one that I like even more is the secondary one that you're supposed to play with a background, Baraka's party leader, who very simply is simply an orc and counts as every party creature, and then has an effect where like whenever your party creatures hit players, you like generate treasure tokens and stuff. There's a very cute combination you can do. One of the backgrounds, one of the backgrounds. One of the black ones, in fact, the mythic black one from the one of the other precons, it says whenever your commander becomes tapped, every creature that shares a creature type with it gets undying and +2/+0.
Oh,
So if you
wow.
play it with Barakos, unfortunately you're restricted only to mono black, but all of your wizards, warriors, clerics, and rogues get that effect. I think that's just such a cute design
That is
space to
very cool.
be able to play with that. If you were to build a deck around that, honestly, you're probably not playing a party deck. You're
Yeah.
probably just playing a mono black value deck,
You're playing
and the
like
creature.
rogues.
Yeah, well, what I would do is simply just play like an aristocrats deck and just make sure that all of my aristocrats are party creatures.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Let me tell you
Clerics and
what,
rogues.
it's
Yeah.
pretty easy to even just between clerics and wizards, pretty easy to
Oh
play
yeah.
aristocrats.
Yeah. I think party just should have been better, honestly. I think
Yeah,
they should have been better payoffs. I like the mechanic of creating a group of different types of creatures, but the payoffs are so just boring. Not even that
agreed.
bad. They're just boring.
Yeah, I would absolutely be inclined to agree with that. The best way you can really take advantage of it is playing in the decks that have a lot of like changelings in it,
Yeah.
and then you can kind of incidentally gain the value of those cards. Because again, it doesn't really actually care about the creatures you have in play. It just cares about reducing the mana value of what you're casting because you fit, X, Y, or Z prerequisite. And yeah, I think they could have done a lot more exciting stuff with that.
Mhm.
Alrighty, so moving on to the next one. This is my final least favorite mechanic. This one is level up. This is another one. It feels like, this is like what, 2 or 3 times now that we've come back to a mechanic and gone flavorfully. This is really cool,
Mm-hmm.
but mechanically it really just misses. And I will say, at the time of its release, this wasn't a terrible mechanic. Wasn't the best mechanic in the world. It's the kind of thing. I mean, the real issue with it is that you have to sink time and mana into it, right?
Yeah.
And then if you lose the creature that has level up, you have now lost a lot more than if you had simply effectively lost the 1 mana that you paid to cast this silly little
Yeah.
merfolk or
Yeah.
whatever. For anybody that is not aware, the level up mechanic, it's from the original Zendikar block. And also, so this actually kind of comes back to the party mechanic a little bit too. Before Magic the Gathering had the wherewithal and the ability to license Dungeons and Dragons in their game, Zendikar was actually, as a plane, designed around the thematic ideology of Dungeons and Dragons. It was all about adventuring and exploring, and that's allies. The ally mechanic was actually kind of an attempt to do a party-like thing, because you'll see that most of the ally creatures are things like, druids and shamans and rogues and wizards and warriors and stuff, because it's trying to kind of reflect like these are the D&D like party characters. These are like the good guys are fighting against vampires and all kinds of stuff like that. And that was kind of the initial idea of Zendikar. And so when we look at the level up mechanic, that's a direct reflection of them trying to sink their teeth into that kind of D&D design space as well. And the way that this would work is that each creature would have a different level up cost, which varies from creature to creature. It might be 1 blue mana, might be 2 colorless mana. It depends on the creature. There's really like 3 or 4 level up creatures that I really have seen play over the years. But essentially they have little thresholds on that card where once it has X level counters on it, then it is at this level, right? So if it has 3 level counters, it's level 3, and then it'll have a little threshold on that card. When it reaches level 3, it gets this ability. When it reaches level 6, it gets this ability. Some of those abilities can be pretty powerful, but the problem is any of the ones that have playably powerful effects, you have to pay a lot of mana to get there, right?
Yeah.
And if you have, even like, I think one of the best examples I can think of is like Lighthouse Chronologist, right? This is one of the ones, like, I thought this card was super strong when I first started playing Magic. I would say that this is kind of a trap card, honestly. And it's a mythic rare as well. So it's 2 mana, it's a 1/3, and it levels up for a single blue mana. If you level up to level 4, then it becomes a 2/4. That's the only thing that it does. In order to get to level 4 already, you are paying 6 mana for a 2/4 that does nothing else, right? So if somebody removes this card before it gets to the next tier is level 7, then you have spent 6 mana on... That's one of the worst costed effects I've ever seen in Magic, right? If you do get to level 7, this means that you have to pay 7 blue mana in addition to the 2 mana that you already paid, at which point it becomes a 3/5, but it gives you a very powerful effect, right?
Yeah.
At the beginning of each end step, if it's not your turn, take an extra turn after this one. In Commander, that means that you're taking 4 turns around, okay? That's nuts. But the problem is, you're never going to get there, and you're going to put... It's the kind of thing where it looks at you, the player, and it's like, yeah, give me your mana. Don't you want to play me? Don't you want to take so many turns? Don't you want to take 4 times as many turns as all of your friends, which will make them like you more?
Definitely
Right?
not stop playing with you.
Exactly. But you're never gonna get to that point. You're gonna spend your entire turn dumping and you can only level up as a sorcery too.
Yeah.
So you're gonna spend your whole turn trying to get to, because you're like, oh, if I can just get to that level 7, then it's gonna make up for all of this. Which, in 1 or 2 rounds might well be true. You'll definitely gain enough value out of that after like 1 round in Commander to recoup your losses there, but you're never going to get there. You're going to be sitting there with a shitty creature that cannot protect you, cannot deal damage in the meantime, and then before it ever gets to its useful effects is going to die. The only one that there are 2 that I've ever seen that are like still played today. One of them is a Merfolk Lord, and the other one is an Elf Lord. That's essentially it. The Elf Lord, I mean, it's easy as hell to generate mana in an elf ball deck, so it kind of makes up for some of that opportunity cost. It just buffs all of your elves, and I think it taps for mana as well. And then the Merfolk Lord very simply buffs your Merfolks.
Yeah.
You know, and that one you don't have to level up a lot of times either.
I will say this level up is kind of continued to be printed, but in a little bit of a different form. For example, Ascendant Spirit and Evolved Sleeper, where they
Oh,
just have like the pay like 2 mana and it changes
right.
creature type and gains new abilities. That's pretty close to what level up was. The difference being, those let you do it. Well, almost all of them, I believe, let you do it at instant speed, and it's like that mana cost and that effect happens. And I think that that is a much bigger deal than Evolve, where you have to pump 1 mana into it, pump 1 mana into it, pump one
Right.
mana into it, and get like 8 counters. Okay, now it has this ability. Like that,
Yeah.
it's very, very different. But I think it's the same idea, and I actually really like the kind of new version of it. Like the new Samwise from the
Yes.
Lord of the
Very
Rings sets
cool.
has that, where he transforms his creature type.
Right.
Very cool stuff. I like that. I do not like level up. I agree.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, that mechanic, if I recall, is actually a little bit older than level up.
It might
Because
be.
because the first time it ever appeared was in the Lorwyn block, which I believe is before. Yeah, that's before Zendikar.
Yes.
The first one we ever saw with this, and these are almost across the board. These are one drops too, so it's really easy to. We usually see them in two colors, but the first one is Figure of Destiny in red white. Um, all of these abilities are based on. The first one is typically 1 mana, and it changes the creature type and buffs it up. The second one you can only activate if it is the first one's creature
Mm-hmm.
type. So Figure of Destiny, it's 1 mana, become a Kithkin Spirit. You can pay 3 mana. If it's a spirit, it becomes a 4/4 warrior. And then for
Oh,
six
I forgot
mana,
that card existed.
yeah, and then for 6 mana, if it's already a warrior, then it gets way better. And gets all these super powerful effects and stuff. It's kind of a similar thing of like you do have to invest mana into it, but you can do it at instant speed. It's you get more out of it because one of the bigger issues with level up is typically the highest tier of effect is very good, but everything in between is essentially a waste of mana.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have that problem with these cards because it is like this is more of a thing where it's like it's a threat that keeps up with the turns is really what it does. It's actually even more effective because if you play Figure of Destiny on turn 1 and then upgrade it at turn 3, you have a 4/4 on turn 3. That could have been, I will say, like a 1/1 and a 3/3, which could potentially be better depending on how you look at it. But then, by turn 6, you've got an 8/8 with all these abilities and stuff. One of the cuter things I've seen people do with these cards is they'll play stuff that like Maskwood Nexus that makes them all creature types. And then you can just
Mm.
automatically go to the
Just do
last
the
step,
last
which is
one.
pretty funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the other one that I remember was I don't recall the name of the card, but it was from Cons of Tarkir, I believe. It was like a green white or a green black card from the which one of the like Tarkir clans was the +1/+1 counter? One of the Abzan cards, I believe, had that effect on it.
Mm-hmm.
Alrighty, Mason, what have you got for your next least favorite
All
mechanic?
right. Then I believe this is the final one, correct? This is all three for
Yes,
each of
sir.
us. All right. I despise with my entire being the cleave mechanic from the new
Cleave. Okay.
Innistrad.
Okay, I'm
And
listening.
okay, this is another thing. It's almost there flavor wise, right? If anyone is unfamiliar, cleave is a card has regular text on it, and then part of that text is in square brackets. And if you play the cleave cost, or if you pay the cleave cost in addition to the regular mana cost, you play that card without the text in brackets. And flavor wise, Innistrad, right? Very like nightmarish thing. Cleave brings to mind like a guy swinging an axe, hacking people or monsters or things, ideas into pieces. And it's really close there. I think Cleave is really close to that, like flavor wise. However, there is a very old Magic the Gathering joke, and that joke is that everything is kicker. Morph is just kicker, but delayed, and you turn the creature upside down, right? Monstrous is just delayed kicker, Overload is just a different type of kicker. But I will tell you right now that cleave is just kicker.
It really
There
is.
is no extra sub little rule. Cleave is just kicker.
It's essentially backwards kicker.
It is. So
Right, because kicker is you're paying an
reason-
extra cost for more effects. Cleave is you're paying usually a cheaper cost for less effects.
Yes. So I understand the reason they did it, right? The reason they did it is because some of the card decks would be too long. So there is a card called Inspired Idea. It is 2 anonymous and a blue sorcery. Draw 3 cards, and then in square brackets, your maximum hand size is reduced by 3 for the rest of the game. And its cleave cost is 5. Sorry, it's not in addition to, it's instead.
Instead, it's
Yeah.
an alternate casting
Yeah.
card.
And so if you play it for 5 mana, it instead just says draw 3 cards. And I get that, like, if Cleave didn't exist, the card would read like, draw 3 cards, your maximum hand size is reduced by 3 for the rest of the game. Kicker, if you pay this for its kicker cost, instead draw 3 cards, right? Like, that's longer. That's a longer text box. It has more words. I think Cleave could have just not happened. They took a really cool MTG like name, like Cleave. Cleave is a super cool mechanic, especially for Innistrad. Like I said, like hacking things apart, and they made it kicker.
I had never thought about that. I've heard
it's
the
such a
joke.
waste.
Everything is kicker for such a long time, and somehow I never noticed that Cleave literally is kicker.
It is. It literally is just
That's
kicker.
so funny.
It is,
and it's actually, when you look at it from like a little more of like a flavor wise kind of thing, this is a very rare example where they named this mechanic over what they're doing with the text and not what's happening in
like in the card,
world.
in the effect.
Right. Yeah, so like it's called cleave because you, the player, are cleaving off words from the text box. It's not. It actually has nothing to do with like hacking things apart in the world. So yeah, you're absolutely right there.
Yeah, I think that if you're gonna use the keyword cleave on Innistrad, right, like hack creatures apart, hack pieces of them off, make more like copies of the creature that are weaker, right? Like split them into pieces. Instead, you made it you put kicker on the Innistrad cards, and you used up a cool keyword to do it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean,
you.
As a long time like Dungeons and Dragons and MMO player, to me, cleave has a bespoke meaning, which means hitting 2 or more enemies at the same time. So I would have loved to see cleave be introduced as like a kind of keyword, almost like trample. I mean, you could use it almost exactly like trample, where you deal excess damage to another creature.
Yeah,
right. That'd be cool as hell. And cleave would be
sick.
Literally the perfect keyword for that.
And now instead it's
a better keyword for that.
Instead of anything cool, it is now Innistrad kicker. That is what they used it on. And that peeves me to no end.
I actually almost put kicker on this list.
Under favorite or least favorite?
On my least favorite.
Not going on obscure.
It's not going on obscure, absolutely. The main thing, because I think we have there are kind of 3 eras of kicker. The original kicker cards were, for the most part, not 4, because there was like prototype kicker, they were pretty much all bad. Then there was okay, we've got it now kicker, which is we had tons of these cards.
We had
like this when we were still in the old border days. There were just oodles of cards with kicker, and many of them were pretty dang good. Then we had the return era of kicker, where they were bad again. And then in the last like couple of years, when we've seen kicker and multi-kicker come back, they've usually been pretty playable.
Yeah.
But I just remember when I started playing,
everything had kicker.
Everything had kicker, and we were in the bad era of kicker, where everything was bad with kicker. So I took a step back and kind of looked at it more and was like, this isn't that bad of a mechanic. It's just kind of the way that I remember it. There were a lot of bad kicker cards.
You're saying I can pay 7 mana to play a 3/3 that deals 3 on entry? What a fucking steal!
Oh
Holy
my god!
Shit.
Now that's a threat.
All right, we're going on just a little bit over an hour, so let's spend the next 15, 20-ish minutes finishing up with our obscure mechanic that we chose. We each, I believe, only chose one of these, if I'm not mistaken. So, Isaac, would you like to kick us off?
Oh, would I? Oh, man, I'm excited about this. Soul Shift. All right.
You are, Isaac, I picked the same mechanic as you. I picked Soul Shift. I picked fucking Soul Shift. We picked the same obscure.
I'm
This
so
is the
glad I
only
didn't tell you
one.
before we started recording.
This is the only one where we picked the same mechanic. And it was on the
I cannot
obscure
believe
one.
you picked Soul
Holy
Shift.
shit, I love Soul Shift.
That saves us some time, I guess.
Holy,
Let's just
it
talk about
does.
Soul
Yeah.
Shift.
Holy
Oh
shit.
man.
That's
So
hilarious.
the reason that I picked Soul Shift, for me, the way that this is, so not only is this an extremely obscure mechanic from a pretty often forgotten set, the original Kamigawa block.
Champions,
Champions of Kamigawa, baby. This mechanic says the way that it reads is Soul Shift X. I'm currently looking at the card Body of Jukai, which has Soul Shift 8. The way that this reads is when this is put into a graveyard from play, so when it dies, you may return target spirit card with converted mana cost, in this case, 8 or less from your graveyard to your hand. So if it was Soul Shift 6, you would pick a spirit with mana value 6 or less. If it was Soul Shift 5, you pick with mana value 5 or less. The way that I would really like to see this return would actually to see it either tied to a different creature type, like zombies or skeletons or even elementals, something like that. Because I mean, if we're being honest, Kamigawa spirits are just elementals.
Yeah.
Well, their elementals are demons, I guess. Or to just see it tied to no creature type at all, which might be pushing it too far, especially because, I've caught myself complaining about, oh, this is too generically powerful before. So, I mean, that might be a little hypocritical there to just say, like, get a creature with mana value X or less. But you could call that Grave Shift, Bone Shift, I don't know. I want Soul Shift back, though. I would be fine with seeing it tied to spirits again if the spirits were a big creature type in any particular set, but I want Soul Shift back. That's a cool mechanic, and it's not overpowered, and it's not underpowered either. It's just the only reason it was underpowered in Kamigawa is because all the cards in Kamigawa were bad.
They all suck. So the reason I chose Soul Shift is actually along kind of the similar lines where I love the mechanic, but I have a very, very deep personal attachment to it because the person that taught me to play Magic was my neighbor from many years ago, who is much older than me. She was like 30 when I was like 10, and she taught me how to play Magic, which is pretty hilarious, just because I mentioned it one day. But she gifted me a whole bunch of Magic cards, of her old Magic cards, because she didn't play anymore after she taught me. And the cards that she gave me were from 2 sets. They were from the Mirrodin block, and they're from the Kamigawa block. And the first deck I ever built was green-black Soul Shift Spirits, and it was terrible. Did you play
Name as 1 in there?
I did. I did play Anane as 1, and I didn't understand why it was supposed to be good. I just used it as a big stat stick. I was like, why the fuck would I want things in my graveyard? What? Sorry, Anane Death's Aspect is the one that I'm thinking of.
Yeah, that's the Nana black one, right?
Yeah, but this was the first mechanic I ever built a deck around. I had the good old, like, Zuberas in there, the Dripping Tongue Zuberas.
Oh,
and
hell yeah.
I would shift all kinds of spirits just over and over again, and it was so much fun. I love Soul Shift, and like you said, it's not too strong. It's not too weak. It could be slapped onto other creature types. The only reason it was bad was because all the cards with it were fucking awful.
Right, exactly. Because all of these spirits are like a 9 mana 6/6s with no keyword, and then just have Soul Shift. Right?
I very distinctly remember. I think it's. Let me look up Kami of Lunacy real quick. Kami of Lunacy.
Oh, I've never even heard of this card. That's rare.
Yes, it was disastrous. It is 4 anonymous and 2 black for a 4/1 with flying and Soul Shift 5.
Oh, this is a bad card.
I ran 4 of those in my Soul Shift deck. Fuck yeah.
Oh,
fuck
man.
Yeah, I did.
Wow, I'm still recovering.
Bad.
I cannot believe we both picked Soul
That's
Shift.
Hilarious. God, yeah, that just goes to show you the people want it. The people want Soul Shift back.
That's right.
Clearly.
People begged to come back to Kamigawa, and we did. And we did. Right? So, where's my Soul Shift? I don't care if Kamigawa's full of robots now.
I still have my Aname Death Aspect from back then. I still have it. It's in my binder. I have it like 10 feet from me. I love Soul Shift. God damn.
Honestly, what I would really like to see with Soul Shift is give it to skeletons, call it like a Bone Shift or something. Give skeletons identity as a creature type other than regenerate.
Other than you can pay 2 mana to return it to the battlefield wield tact.
Well, okay. Okay, first of all, don't diss reassembling a skeleton. It's the best
No,
card
that's an
ever printed.
incredible. Yeah, I know it's
My
good.
problem with skeletons is their only identity as a creature type is quote unquote like not dying, I guess, but
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that's regenerate, sometimes it puts it into your hand, sometimes it's reassembling skeleton, it's the best card ever printed. Do something with Soul Shift. And not only that, but I think one of the reasons that Soul Shift really excites me is so rarely do you see graveyard recursion effects that are repeatable.
Yeah.
Unearth, flashback, these are very powerful effects. You can only do them once. And if there's one thing that I hate to see in my graveyard, it's the word exile. I won't stand for
Yeah.
it. And Soul Shift is an excellent way around that, and it's a pretty dang fair mechanic, especially when all the creatures tied to it are trash.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Can you imagine a set where Soul Shift and Dredge were core mechanics?
Oh my
Oh
god.
man,
Ugh, I would coom.
the land of milk and honey.
I remember another kind of just generically related to this mechanic is arcane spells. Like I don't think they
Right.
really fulfilled the niche they were trying to, but I love what they were trying to go for.
Yeah.
Another creature that I ran in my good old Soul Shift deck, probably the only like okay card in that was Thief of Hope, which
Yeah,
is
I'm familiar with Thief of Hope.
yeah, 2 anonymous and a black for a 2/2 spirit that says whenever you play a spirit or arcane spell, you drain one from an opponent with Soul Shift 2. And
Yeah.
like actually an okay card. You know what? That's like mediocre.
Yeah.
Probably the
And
best card in the deck.
funny enough, the mechanic that I almost chose for this was actually Splice, like from
Yeah,
Splice
like
onto
Splice
Arcane.
on Arcane, yeah.
Because that was a cool idea. Again, it kind of suffered from all the cards in that block being bad, so the mechanic was inherently bad as a
Mm-hmm.
result. In the modern day, I see no reason for Splice to be tied only to arcane spells.
Yeah, absolutely.
They could just make Splice and just splice onto an instant or sorcery.
Yep.
For any listeners that aren't aware, Splice onto Arcane is essentially you have an instant or sorcery in your hand and it has a secondary cost. It's not a casting cost, it's an activated ability. Or an additional cost rather, where
Mm-hmm.
whenever you cast an arcane spell, you can pay the splice cost from another card and add that card's text box to whatever you're casting. But you don't actually expend that card; it stays in your hand. It was usually very overcosted, and the arcane spells were bad, so it wasn't really
Yeah.
worth playing.
Yeah.
We saw it return in Modern Horizons 2 on a single card, Splicer skill. Like it's interacts with like the Splicer golems from New Phyrexia, which is kind of cute. But I could definitely see Splice returning as a mechanic just tied to generically instants and sorcery. I think that would be fine.
I think it's very honestly, I think that it could be a very good mechanic.
I think so too. Yeah, absolutely.
Now, question is something that I don't actually know about Splice. Can you do it in response to a spell resolving? I don't actually
How do you
know.
mean?
So like I'm going to cast an arcane spell. I ask, does this resolve? Nothing happens. I splice onto it. They still have the opportunity to counter, of course. That's on the stack.
So I will say now I'm not sure if this is what you mean, but as soon as your opponent passes priority back to you, it resolves and there's nothing
That
else
is
you can
true.
do
Yeah,
in that time.
yeah.
I do, but here, let me look up what I'm not actually sure what the timing on Splice is.
Yeah, it
One
feels
second.
like you could do some wacky shit with it, but I'm not sure
Right.
what that would be.
It's as you cast, so it has to be done the moment you declare what spell
when you
you're
declare
casting.
it. Okay, makes
Yes.
sense. That makes sense. That clears things up quite a lot.
Yes, indeed. Alrighty. Well, I believe that's about all we've got for time today. Was
It
there anything
is.
else we wanted to cover before we get to the end of the episode?
No, I think that about covers it. We were thinking about going over some spoilers and stuff, or mentioning upcoming sets, anything like that. But we used all of our time very
Indeed,
effectively.
we had a lot to
I
say.
think we did.
We had a lot to say.
Very fun.
We'll come
episode.
back to talk about upcoming, exciting March of the Machines revolutionary spoilers next week.
Absolutely. So absolutely rejoin us for that kind of stuff. Take a look at the card list. We'll probably be talking about some deck ideas, some commander ideas.
Yeah.
What we think is going to be absolutely fucking busted, and what we think of battles. So make sure to join us next week. And as always, we'll see you soon.